While my husband rotted in prison, his best friend became my everything. The most calculated love affair ever orchestrated by a woman who refused to break. Part 1. The Fog. Chapter 1. The night everything ended. The call came at 7:43 p.m. on a Thursday evening in October, while Jennifer was standing at the kitchen island of their Fairfax colonial-style home, slicing a honeydew melon into careful crescents for Leon's dinner. She had always been meticulous about small things. The way she cut fruit, the way she folded towels, the way she arranged the morning crossword puzzle on the kitchen table before Leon woke up. It was a marriage of 15 years built on these quiet rituals: the crossword at 7 a.m., dinner at 7 p.m., sex on Saturday nights if they were both in the mood, which they increasingly weren't. Jennifer had long ago stopped questioning the drift. Marriage, she had decided somewhere around year 8, was not a fire that needed constant tending. It was a house. You maintained it. You didn't expect it to surprise you. She heard the doorbell ring just as she was putting the melon into the refrigerator to chill. Leon was upstairs changing out of his work clothes. She dried her hands on the dish towel and walked to the front door, expecting the neighbor with the yappy Pomeranian, or perhaps a delivery she'd forgotten about. Instead, she found two men in dark suits standing on her front porch, and behind them, a black sedan parked at the curb with government plates. One of the men held a badge up to the light. "Miss Marshall? We're with the federal prosecutor's office. Is your husband home?" Jennifer's hand, still holding the dish towel, went to her throat. She didn't speak. Couldn't. "Mrs. Marshall, we have a warrant for the arrest of Leonard James Marshall on charges related to federal grant fraud. He's here, we understand." She heard footsteps behind her. Leon was descending the stairs, still tucking his shirt into his khakis, the way he did every evening, unaware. "Leon's here," Jennifer said, and her voice came out in a strange, flat tone that didn't sound like her at all. "Leon, there are." The agents pushed past her into the house. One of them was reading Leon his rights from a laminated card while the other moved with practiced efficiency, producing handcuffs from his belt. Leon's face went pale, then red, then a color that Jennifer had never seen on a human being before, a kind of ashen white streaked with bursts of dark red, like a sky before a terrible storm. "Jennifer," Leon said, his voice cracking. "Jennifer, I can explain." "You can explain what?" She was standing by the kitchen island, the honeydew melon slices sitting in their ceramic bowl, the knife still wet from her hand. "Leon, what is this? What did you do?" "Mrs. Marshall, your husband is being detained for alleged financial crimes related to his work at the EPA. He has the right to remain silent. This is a mistake," Leon said, his eyes locked on Jennifer's. "Baby, this is all a mistake. I didn't do what they think I did." "I swear to God, Jennifer, secure him," one of the agents said to the other. The handcuffs clicked around Leon's wrists with a sound that Jennifer would hear in her dreams for years afterward. Click. Click. Like a door locking on a room you could never enter again. They let him out the front door in front of her. The porch light was on, and the October air smelled like decaying leaves and someone's fireplace a few houses down. Leon was made to walk down the front steps in front of the neighbors. Linda Huang from number 2847 was standing on her own porch with her hand over her mouth, watching. The news would travel up and down Colchester Road by morning. Leon was placed in the back of the black sedan. Before the door was closed, he turned and looked at Jennifer one more time, standing alone in her foyer with the door open behind her, the cold October air rushing into her warm house. "I didn't do it," he called out. "Jennifer, I love you. I didn't do it." The sedan pulled away. Jennifer watched its taillights disappear around the corner of Colchester and Sycamore, and she continued to stand there for a very long time, long after the sound of the engine had faded into the silence of the suburban evening. She thought, I should close the door. It's getting cold. She thought, there's honeydew melon in the refrigerator. Leon was going to eat honeydew melon for dinner. She thought, this isn't real. This cannot be real. But the October air kept rushing in, and eventually, 10 minutes later, or perhaps 30, she had no way of knowing, Jennifer closed the front door and walked into her kitchen and looked at the honeydew melon sitting in its ceramic bowl on the counter. And she thought, he was going to eat this melon. He was going to come upstairs and watch the news and fall asleep on the couch, and I was going to read my book in bed. She picked up the ceramic bowl and held it for a moment, and then she set it carefully, deliberately, on the floor, and she watched it shatter into a dozen pieces. Jennifer Marshall stood in her kitchen at 8:17 p.m. on the night her husband was arrested, surrounded by broken ceramic and honeydew melon juice running across the tile, and she did not cry. Not yet. The crying would come later, much later, in the small hours of many mornings, in the shower, in the car, in the bathroom at her father-in-law's house where she thought no one could hear her. But not now. Now there was only a strange, hollow ringing in her ears, a sound like a phone ringing in a room where no one was home. Chapter 2. The silence after the first week was the worst. Jennifer did not go to work. She called in sick, and then she called in sick again, and finally her department head at the National Endowment for the Arts, Dr. Eileen Park, left a voicemail asking if Jennifer needed anything, and Jennifer deleted it without listening to the full message. She could not bear the kindness. The kindness would break her. Leon called from the detention center twice, 3 times in the first week. The calls were monitored, he told her. Everything he said was being recorded. So what came through the telephone was a strange, sanitized version of her husband. No curse words, no real explanations, no raw emotion. Just Leon's voice saying things like, I'm okay, Jen and the lawyers are handling it, and I love you. Don't worry about me, in a tone so flattened it sounded like he was reading from a script. She wanted to scream into the phone. What do you mean the lawyers are handling it? What lawyers? What did you do? Why didn't you tell me? 15 years, Leon. 15 years I have trusted you. Was any of it real? But she said none of this. She said, I love you too, and we're going to get through this, and I'll visit on Saturday. And she hung up the phone and sat on the edge of her bathtub and pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw colored stars. The house was unbearable. Every room held the residue of the life she'd been living. The crossword puzzles still sitting on the kitchen table from that morning, now yellowed and curling at the edges because she hadn't moved it in a week. Leon's slippers by the bedside, exactly where he'd kicked them off every night for 15 years. The indentation in the less cushion of the couch where he sat and watched ESPN and fell asleep during basketball season. She had known this man for 20 years. She had loved him, she thought, loves him, present tense, she corrected herself, because he is still her husband and she does still love him. She has to believe that, because if she doesn't love him, then what was the point of everything? The honeydew melon, the crossword puzzles, the Saturday night sex that had become a formality, a ritual without spirit. Her father called. Richard Cheng, deputy mayor of the Fairfax district for 22 years, a man who had navigated 4 mayoral administrations and enough political scandal to fill a river, who had taught Jennifer everything she knew about survival. And make no mistake, she knew things now that she had not known a week ago. Things about Leon and the EPA grant accounts and a consulting firm called Meridian Solutions that Leon had been quietly billing hours to since 2017. Her father listened to her on the phone for 40 minutes without interrupting, and when she finished, he said, "Jennifer, listen to me. You are my daughter. You are a Chang. We do not break. Do you understand me? We do not break." She understood. The Changs did not break. They bent, they adapted, they played the long game. Her father had survived 2 impeachment inquiries, 3 electoral challenges, and an affair that had nearly ended his marriage in 1998. He had taught Jennifer that the only thing that mattered in life was the story people told about you, and that you controlled that story through discipline, through grace under pressure, through never, never letting them see you bleed. She would not bleed. Not for the neighbors. Not for the federal prosecutor's office. Not for the women at the Fairfax Country Club who would be whispering about her over their salmon and white wine by the weekend. Jennifer went upstairs and looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. She looked like a woman whose husband had been arrested. Hollow-eyed. Skin without luster. Hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that served no aesthetic purpose whatsoever. She looked like a woman who had given up. She turned on the tap and washed her face with cold water, and she looked at herself again, and she said, no. Not to her reflection. Not to God. Not to fate. Just a single declarative syllable. No. She did not know yet what she was refusing. She didn't have a plan. But somewhere in the pit of her stomach, in the deep animal instinct that her father had cultivated and that her mother, before the Alzheimer's took everything, had called her fighting spirit, something had ignited. A small flame. A refuso. Jennifer Chang Marshall was not going to be a victim. Not of Leon's choices. Not of the federal government. Not of circumstance. She was going to survive this. ## Chapter 3, The Lifeline. Shane O'Brien called on the 4th night. Jennifer recognized the number on her phone, a Virginia area code, not saved in her contacts, but familiar in the way that the voice on the other end of it would become over the coming months. Shane. Leon's best friend since college. Leon had met Shane. During their freshman year at George Mason, they'd been roommates for 2 years and best friends for 23. Shane had been the best man at Jennifer and Leon's wedding. He had held Jennifer's hand at her mother's funeral 3 years ago when Leon was stuck in Seoul on a work trip. He was, by every measure, one of the constants in their lives. Jennifer. His voice was low and warm, the voice of a man who had been drinking maybe 1 whiskey too many and was calling from his car in a parking lot somewhere, because that's where Shane always made his most honest phone calls. I just heard. I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say. She hadn't expected the call. In the chaos of the first 4 days, the lawyers, the arraignment, her father-in-law weeping at the kitchen table, her own father's controlled fury as he made calls to contacts who could help, she had not thought about Shane. She had not thought about anyone but Leon and herself and the terrible machinery of the legal system that was grinding forward, indifferent to her sufferings. Shane, she said, and her voice cracked on his name. The first crack. The first fissure in the wall she'd been building. Don't, he said gently. You don't have to say anything. I'm just calling to tell you that I'm here. Whatever you need. I mean it, Jennifer. Whatever you need. She closed her eyes. The phone felt warm against her ear. She could hear, faintly, the sound of traffic in the background of his call. He was on the road, or in a parking garage, or somewhere with the engine idling and the radio playing something soft. Thank you, she said. I don't know what we need yet. I don't know anything right now. I know, he said. That's okay. You don't have to know. I just wanted you to hear a friendly voice. They talked for 20 minutes that night. Shane told her about his week. His restaurant supply business was booming. He just closed a huge contract with a hospitality group down in Richmond. He was working 18-hour days and his wife Linda was furious about it. And Jennifer listened and found, to her surprise, that she was grateful. Not for the distraction exactly, but for the reminder that the world outside her house was still turning. That there were people out there living ordinary lives, closing contracts, arguing with their wives, existing in a state of mundane contentment. She had forgotten that was possible. He called again on the 6th day, and the 9th. The calls became a rhythm, always in the evening, always around dinner time, always lasting between 15 and 40 minutes depending on how much wine Shane had poured himself and how many things Jennifer needed to say out loud in order to keep from screaming. Shane was careful, she noticed. He never asked pointed questions about the case. He never offered legal opinions or speculation about what Leon might have done or not done. He simply showed up. Every evening at the appointed hour, his voice arriving in her ear like a hand extended across a dark room. He asked about her, how she was sleeping, whether she was eating. Had she been to the house in Reston that her father-in-law was letting them stay in while the Fairfax house sat on the market? Was she still working? She wasn't working, was she? She should rest. She should be kind to herself. He meant it. Every word. Jennifer was not a fool. She understood, even in those early weeks, that the nature of their conversations was shifting. There was an intimacy developing that went beyond the expected consolations of friendship. Shane asked about her in ways that suggested he was paying attention to her, not as Leon's wife, not as a neighbor, not as a woman to be pitied, but as Jennifer. As a person whose inner life mattered to him. She told herself it was grief. Proximity. The shared trauma of watching someone you care about get torn apart by the machinery of the federal government. She told herself that what she felt when she hung up the phone and sat in the dark of her living room, replaying his voice, smiling at nothing, was gratitude. Nothing more. She almost believed it. Part 2, The Descent Chapter 4. The night that changed everything. By the 6th week, Jennifer had developed a routine. She woke at 7. She made coffee black, no sugar, a habit she'd acquired in her 20s and maintained out of discipline rather than preference. She sat at the kitchen table of her father-in-law's house in Reston and opened her laptop and read the news. Then she called her lawyer, Martin Kessler, who had been a colleague of her father's since the Reagan administration, and who charged $700 an hour to tell Jennifer that the government's case was strong but not insurmountable. Then she called Leon, who was still being held at the Alexandria Detention Center, and listened to his monitored voice describe his life in a 6x9 cell, and tried to feel something other than a dull, persistent dread. Then, in the late afternoon, she did the thing that was becoming her secret addiction. She waited for Shane's phone call. He called at 6:30 p.m. on the night it happened. She knew because she had started watching the clock with a focus that frightened her, not the clock as a measure of time passing, but the clock as a countdown to a specific moment. 6:15, 6:20, 6:25, and then the phone would ring and she would feel a sensation in her chest that she could only describe as relief, as though the day had been building toward this one moment and only this moment mattered. That evening, Shane's voice was different. Heavier. He told her he'd had a bad day. A client had stiffed him on a payment, a big one, $30,000, and his cash flow was suddenly precarious. He told her Linda was on his case about the restaurant again. She wanted him to sell it, to be home more, to be present for their daughter's piano recitals and their son's soccer games. But I can't, he said, his voice rough. I can't just walk away from the thing I built with my own hands, you know? That's not who I am. Jennifer understood. She understood Shane in a way that she was beginning to suspect went beyond the intellectual. She understood his restlessness, his need to build and create and be recognized. She understood the loneliness of being the person everyone relied on but no one really saw. I'm sorry, she said. That sounds awful. It's fine, he said. It's my own fault. I just wish I had someone to talk to. Someone who actually gets it. The silence that followed was charged. Jennifer could feel it, a wire pulled taut between them, humming with something that had been building for weeks. She was sitting on the couch in the Reston house, a glass of wine on the coffee table in front of her, the curtains drawn against the early November dark. She was wearing a cashmere sweater that Leon had bought her for her birthday 3 years ago, the color of burgundy wine, and she had painted her nails the weekend before, a deep red that her mother would have called too bold, but that made her feel, for the first time in months, like a woman. Shane, she said, and she didn't recognize her own voice. It was lower, more breath than sound. Do you want to come over? I have wine. I'm sitting here with a glass of wine. I'm not doing anything. A pause. A long, electric pause. Yeah, he said. Yeah, okay. I'll come over. He arrived in 40 minutes. She heard his Audi pull into the driveway and felt something convulse in her stomach. Not nerves exactly, but a kind of animal anticipation, a readiness that her body understood before her mind caught up. She opened the door. He was standing on the porch with a paper bag from the Sichuan restaurant on Route 7, the one they talked about in their calls, the one with the mapo tofu that Shane swore was the best in Northern Virginia. He was wearing a navy peacoat and no tie, his collar open, his hair slightly disheveled. He looked tired. He looked handsome. He looked at her the way a man looks at a woman when he has been thinking about her for a long time and has finally admitted it to himself. I brought food, he said. Come in, she said. They ate on the living room floor. They didn't bother with plates. They sat cross-legged on the hardwood like college students, passing containers of Kung Pao chicken and Dan Dan noodles back and forth, and Shane opened a second bottle of wine, and the conversation wandered from his cash flow problems to his childhood in Richmond to his father's death in 2015 to the first time he'd met Leon and thought, this guy is going to be my best friend for the rest of my life. Jennifer listened. She ate. She drank more than she should have, more than she ever drank. Certainly more than was wise when a man she'd been speaking to on the phone every evening for 6 weeks was sitting on her floor with red wine on his lips and something burning in his eyes. At some point, she couldn't have said when Shane reached over and took her hand. Not romantically. Not yet. Just his hand over hers, warm and dry, his thumb facing the back of her knuckles. She looked down at their hands and felt her breath catch. Jen, he said. Not Jennifer. Jen. A name no one had called her since college. A name that sounded different in Shane's voice, more intimate, more real. You have to know that everything I've done, every phone call, it's because I care about you. Not because of Leon. Not because of guilt or obligation. Because I care about you. She looked up at him. His eyes were dark and serious and fixed on her face with an intensity that made the room feel smaller. I know, she said. I need you to know that. I know, Shane. He leaned forward. She could smell his cologne, something woody, something that reminded her of pine forests and cold air and the kind of men in paperback novels who swept women off their feet. His face was close to hers. She could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight stubble on his jaw, the small scar on his chin from a skateboarding accident when he was 16. "Jen," he said again, barely a whisper. She kissed him. It happened the way a dam breaks, not with warning, not with hesitation, but with a sudden and total collapse of everything that had been holding back the water. She kissed him and he kissed her back, and his hand went to the back of her neck, his fingers threading into her hair, and she pulled him toward her by the lapels of his pea coat and felt the solid warmth of his chest against hers, felt the proof that another human being wanted her, desired her, found her worthy of this heat. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Shane rested his forehead against hers and said, "Are you sure? Because if you're not, if this is grief or loneliness or, I'm sure," she said. And she wasn't. And she was. And she would never be entirely certain, for the rest of her life, which part of her had made that decision, the part that was a grieving wife or the part that was a woman rediscovering her own hunger. It didn't matter. She had made it. And she was not going to unsay it. They made love that night on the couch in her father-in-law's living room, and it was nothing like she had expected, not that she had expected anything, certainly not this, and yet it was everything her body had been craving for months, maybe years. Shane was gentle and thorough and attentive in a way that Leon had not been in a very long time, if ever. He kissed her neck. He whispered her name. He touched her like she was precious and dangerous and rare, and when she came unexpectedly, explosively, with a sound that surprised her and made Shane smile against her throat, she felt something shift in the architecture of her soul. A wall coming down. A door opening onto a room she had not known existed. Afterward, they lay tangled on the couch, Shane's peacoat draped over them like a blanket. She wore his shirt. She looked at his profile in the dim light from the hallway, the strong nose, the full mouth, the air of a man who had built a small empire and was still hungry for more. "Still thinking?" Shane asked, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. She laughed. The sound surprised her. It was lighter than anything she had produced in weeks. "Always." He pulled her closer. She rested her head on his chest and felt the steady thump of his heart, and she thought, "I am standing at the edge of a cliff. I know that I am. But I have been so careful for so long, and I am so tired of being careful." She did not know yet where the cliff led. She did not know if it was a fall or a flight. She kissed his collarbone and let herself fall anyway. Chapter 5. The game begins by December. They had established rules. No calls after 10 p.m. Shane would not text or call during daylight hours unless it was absolutely necessary. He used a burner phone, an inexpensive Samsung prepaid that he kept in the glove compartment of his Audi and activated only when he was driving to or from Jennifer's. The number changed every 2 weeks. Jennifer had memorized 3 different numbers and could recite them like poems, like mantras, like the multiplication tables of an illicit curriculum. They never emailed, never used social media, never spoke on any platform that left a digital record. When they saw each other, twice a week, sometimes 3 times, Shane would text a single word to her regular phone, "Tonight." And Jennifer would know. She learned quickly. She learned that Shane was most attentive after they hadn't seen each other for a few days. The 2-day gap seemed to be his threshold for missing her. She learned that he responded to restraint, not pursuit. If she was too eager, too available, too waiting by the phone, his interest cooled like a pilot light. But if she stepped back, if she went out with her college roommate for dinner, if she mentioned in a casual text that she was reading a book and wouldn't be available. His attention reignited. He called twice in one day. He asked questions he hadn't asked before. He wondered about the book and wanted to discuss it, and could she send him a passage, the one about the lighthouse? Jennifer recognized this dynamic immediately. Her father had taught her about leverage. In any negotiation, he'd told her once, when she was 22 and starting her first real job, the person who wants it less holds the power. Remember that, Jenny. Need is a weakness. Make them want you, not need you. It was the oldest lesson in her father's book, and it applied to politics and business, and, she was discovering, to love. Or whatever this was. She did not call it love. She was not ready to name it. She called it this thing, this situation, this arrangement. Shane brought her fruit and snacks when he visited. He remembered that she'd once mentioned, offhandedly, in one of their early phone calls, that she liked the dried mango from the Asian supermarket on Route 50. He started bringing it every time, a small gesture that undid her more than she wanted to admit. He accompanied her to 2 of Leon's court hearings, sitting 2 rows behind her in the gallery of the federal courthouse on King Street, a silent presence that made her feel less alone. He helped her carry boxes when she finally moved her things out of the Fairfax house. He was, by any measure, the most reliable and thoughtful lover she had ever had. And his wife, Linda, suspected nothing. Or suspected everything and chose silence. Jennifer had met Linda a dozen times over the years, at barbecues at Leon and Jennifer's, at Shane and Linda's Christmas party, at the birthday celebrations for their mutual friends, and she had always read Linda as a woman who had made her peace with her marriage. Linda O'Brien was a former event planner turned stay-at-home mother, a woman who cared deeply about her children's Ivy League futures and the correct temperature at which to serve risotto. She was pretty in a maintained way, blonde highlights, regular facials, a wardrobe of tasteful Neutrogena-adjacent pastels. She was not, Jennifer thought, a woman who spent much time wondering what her husband did on Tuesday evenings when he said he was driving to Richmond on business. But occasionally, Shane mentioned something that made Jennifer's stomach tighten. Linda had started asking questions. Where was he going? Who was he meeting? Why did he need 2 phones? Shane mentioned it casually, defensively, the way men mention their wives' suspicions when they want to reassure their mistresses that there is nothing to worry about. Jennifer listened and nodded and filed the information away. She started being more careful. She showered after Shane left instead of before he arrived, a small change, but one that meant her hair was wet and her skin was scrubbed clean of any trace of his presence. She opened the windows after their meetings and let the December air flush the warmth from the rooms. She washed the sheets twice. She realized with a kind of clinical detachment, becoming excellent at the logistics of concealment. And then there was the matter of her own transformation. Jennifer had not been unaware of herself before October. She had maintained her appearance with the same discipline she brought to everything, regular workouts at the Fairfax gym, a skincare routine that cost more than her car payment, quarterly appointments with her colorist. But the woman she had been before Leon's arrest had been maintained in the way a house is maintained, efficiently, routinely, without passion. She had been a pretty woman who had stopped trying to be beautiful because she had stopped believing anyone was watching. Now people were watching. Shane was watching. And in the months since his attention had become a daily fact of her life, Jennifer had begun to pay a different kind of attention to herself. She was not just maintaining. She was becoming. She lost 14 pounds between October and January, a combination of stress and the new appetite that came from wanting to be desired. She started getting facials every 3 weeks, not the occasional pampering she'd indulged in before, but a serious regimen prescribed by an esthetician in Tyson's who took one look at Jennifer's skin and said, "Oh honey, you're going to glow." She got her hair highlighted in a technique called balayage that her regular stylist had been trying to sell her for years. She bought new clothes, dresses that nipped at the waist, boots with heels that made her calves look athletic, a leather jacket that made her feel like someone who had a secret. She looked, her roommate Carla observed when they had dinner in Georgetown in January, like a woman on a mission. "Maybe I am," Jennifer said, and raised her glass of Pinot Noir and did not elaborate. She knew what she was doing. She knew that every pound lost and every new dress and every strategic haircut was an investment, not just in Shane's desire, but in her own sense of self. She had spent 15 years being Leon's wife, being her father's daughter, being the woman in the background of other people's stories. She had been good at disappearing. She was discovering, now, that she was also excellent at reappearing, and in a form that was harder to ignore. When she looked in the mirror now, she did not see the hollow-eyed woman who had stood in her kitchen on the night Leon was arrested. She saw someone sharper, more defined, a woman with edges. She was, she thought, becoming dangerous. And she was not entirely sure she minded. Part 3, The Weight of Secret Things Chapter 6, A House of Cards. By spring, the arrangement had calcified into something that almost resembled a relationship. Shane was a reliable visitor every Tuesday and Friday, with occasional Sunday afternoons when Linda took the kids to her mother's place in Bethesda. He brought wine and food and stories about his day, and Jennifer received him in the living room of the Reston house or, when the weather was better, on the back patio with its view of the manicured backyard and the woods beyond. They talked for hours. They argued, occasionally. Shane was stubborn in the way of self-made men, and Jennifer was stubborn in the way of Chang's, and sometimes their collisions produced sparks that lit fires neither of them intended. But they also laughed. This was the thing that surprised Jennifer most, the laughter. She had expected the physical, had braced for the emotional turbulence. She had not expected to spend entire evenings laughing at Shane's impressions of his clients, at his terrible jokes, at the way he mispronounced French menu items with the confidence of a man who had never been corrected and had never cared to be. He was funny. He was warm. He was the kind of company that made 2 hours feel like 20 minutes. She told herself it didn't mean anything. People laughed with their lovers. That was the nature of intimacy. It was biochemical oxytocin, dopamine, the neurochemical cocktail of pair bonding. It didn't mean she loved him. It didn't mean he loved her. But sometimes, in the amber light of a Reston evening, watching Shane build a fire in the backyard pit while she sat on the patio sofa with a glass of wine and the comfortable weight of his presence settling around her like a blanket, she thought, "What am I doing?" And the answer came not as words but as a feeling, a vast, quiet recognition that she had stepped off the path of her own life and onto one that she could not return from. She had made a choice in December, on the living room floor, and that choice had begun to grow roots, and the roots were now so deep that to pull them up would be to tear something essential out of the ground. She didn't know if she loved Shane. She knew that she needed him. And she knew that the needing was the most honest thing about her, and also the most dangerous. Shane's business was doing better by spring. He had landed a second major client, a hospitality group in Baltimore that kept his trucks running 6 days a week. He told Jennifer about it over the phone, his voice buoyant with the particular energy of a man who had just received confirmation that his own talent was real. 18 trucks, Jen. 18. Do you understand what that means? I understand, she said. And she did understand. She understood ambition and the way it colonized a man's imagination and left little room for anything else. She thought of Leon, of the career he had sacrificed, of the careful life he had been building before it all collapsed. Shane, that's wonderful. Really? I want to celebrate, he said. I want to take you somewhere. Not the Reston house. Somewhere real. Can you get away for a night? She should have said no. Every rule they'd established, every boundary they'd drawn, said that this was as far as it could go. The Reston house was safe because it was anonymous, a rental property, no connection to either of their social circles. A hotel meant exposure. A hotel meant witnesses, receipts, a digital trail that a competent investigator could follow. Yes, she said. I can get away. They went to a boutique inn in Charlottesville, the kind of place with exposed brick and locally sourced menus and a wine list curated by someone who'd clearly spent time in Bordeaux. Jennifer told her father-in-law she was visiting a college friend. She told Carla she was taking a solo retreat to reset. She packed a small bag, a silk nightgown she bought specifically for this purpose, a dress she had not yet worn in Shane's presence, a tube of lipstick in the color her esthetician called winning red. The room had a fireplace and a clawfoot tub and a view of the Blue Ridge Mountains in the distance, hazy and purple in the April evening. Shane ordered champagne from room service and they drank it in the bath, the water steaming around them, and Jennifer felt something she had not felt in years, completely and entirely present. Not worried about tomorrow, not haunted by yesterday, not calculating the angles. Just here. Just now. Just a woman in a clawfoot tub with a man who was looking at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. You're beautiful, he said. Not flattery. Statement of fact. His eyes moving over her with a kind of reverence that made her skin flush. I need you to know that. I've wanted to tell you for months, but I didn't know. How? You could have just said it. I didn't want to make it ordinary. This isn't ordinary, Jen. You know that, right? She knew. She knew it in the way you know the depth of water when you stand at the edge. Shane said. He was holding her hand under the water, their fingers interlaced, the champagne forgotten on the edge of the tub. In my entire life, being with you is the most honest thing I've ever done. Jennifer looked at him, at his wet hair pushed back from his forehead, at the water droplets on his shoulders, at the earnestness in his face that no amount of business acumen or self-made swagger could ever quite erase. She thought, he means it. He means every word. He is a man who has built his life on believing in his own capabilities, and he believes in this too, in us. And she felt, in that moment, a love that was so large and so terrifying that she had to close her eyes against it, had to turn her face to the steam and the water and the amber light of the room and breathe. Yes, she said. I know. She did not say it back. She couldn't. The words were too large and too binding and too real, and she was a woman who had learned from her father, from her husband, from the federal prison system that had swallowed Leon Hall, that the moment you committed to a narrative, you became its servant. But she kissed him, and the kiss said what she couldn't. ## Chapter 7. The shadow in the doorway. It was Linda who came first. Jennifer saw her at the Fairfax Costco on a Saturday morning in May, a bright, warm day that had fooled everyone into thinking summer was already here. Jennifer was pushing a cart full of paper towels and 2-pound containers of blueberries, dressed in jeans and a cotton shirt and sunglasses pushed up on her head, looking like every other suburban woman in the parking lot of a big box store. Linda was in the snack aisle, examining a package of organic granola bars with the focus of a woman who took her children's nutrition seriously. She was with both kids, Sophie, 9, and Ryan, 6, and she looked, Jennifer thought, like a painting of domesticity, all soft edges and comfortable lines, a woman who had arranged her life around certainties. Their eyes met across the end of the aisle. Jennifer, Linda said, and there was something in her voice, a brightness that was slightly too sharp, a warmth that was positioned rather than organic. I didn't know you shopped here. How are you? I've been meaning to call, I've been meaning to reach out, but with the kids and everything, you know how it is. I know, Jennifer said. It's been a lot. But we're managing. Leon must be so relieved that the trial is finally behind him. I mean, not the verdict, but just to have it over with, you know? Waiting is the worst part. Jennifer nodded. The trial had concluded in April. Leon had been sentenced to 3 years, the maximum under the plea agreement. He had accepted responsibility, shown remorse, made restitution. The judge had been sympathetic but firm. Jennifer had sat in the gallery and listened to the sentence handed down and had felt, beneath the disappointment, a strange relief. At least now the waiting was over. At least now they knew where they stood. Shane has been wonderful. Linda continued, her voice casual in the way that casual voices sometimes are when they are performing casualness. Such a good friend. He's been to see Leon so many times, driving all the way to the prison in Danville. Can you imagine? That place is in the middle of nowhere. Jennifer felt the words land in her stomach like a stone dropped into still water. She smiled. The smile of a woman who had no idea what Linda was implying. The smile of a woman who was safe. Shane is the best, she said. We don't know what we would have done without him. Linda looked at her for a moment, really looked, the way women look at each other when they are calculating something, measuring something, deciding something, and then smiled back, and the smile was warm again, and the moment passed, and they made plans to get coffee sometime and said goodbye, and Jennifer pushed her cart to the checkout line and unloaded her paper towels and her blueberries and her organic granola and drove home on the beltway with her hands shaking on the wheel. She called Shane from the car. Her voice was controlled, but controlled was the most dangerous mode, the mode behind which real fear lived. Shane. We need to stop. What? Why? What happened? Linda was at Costco today. She said things. She mentioned how often you visited Leon. She was fishing, Shane. She doesn't know anything specific, but she suspects. And today she was testing me. Silence on the line. Then, Jen. She's suspicious of everything. She's been suspicious since I started working 18-hour days. That's her, not the situation. This is different. You know this is different. She could hear him running his hand through his hair, the gesture she knew so well, the thing he did when he was thinking and didn't want to show it. Okay, he said. Okay. We'll be more careful. We'll pull back. I won't come over for a few weeks. More than a few weeks. Jen, Shane. Linda looked at me today like she was trying to see inside my head. Like she was looking for something she could use. If she ever finds out, if she ever has proof, Jennifer stopped. She didn't need to finish the sentence. The consequences were obvious. Their families destroyed. Leon's friendship with Shane ended forever, the shame of it landing on Jennifer like a physical weight. "I'll handle Linda," Shane said. "I'll talk to her. I'll tell her that I've been stressed about the business and that's why I've been distant." "Do that," Jennifer said. "And Shane? Let's not see each other for a while." The silence that followed was the longest of their relationship. She could hear him breathing, could feel the resistance in his body, the unwillingness to let go even for a few weeks. She felt it too, the phantom sensation of his absence, like a limb going to sleep. "A while," he said. "Okay. But not forever." "Not forever," she agreed. She hung up and drove the rest of the way home in silence, and when she got to the house she poured herself a glass of wine and sat on the back patio and watched the sun set over the Virginia woods and thought, this is what it costs. This is the price of the fire. And I am going to have to keep paying it, over and over, for as long as I stay warm. Chapter 8. The countdown. Leon would be home in November. Jennifer did the math on a yellow legal pad, sitting at the kitchen table on a humid August evening while the cicadas sang outside the windows and the house was so quiet she could hear the tick of the wall clock in the hallway. 2 years, 8 months. 347 days of Shane's visits, Shane's phone calls, Shane's laughter and warmth, and the particular way he said her name like it was a country he discovered and didn't want to share. 2 years, 8 months of a life that had no name and no address and no future tense. She had promised herself, from the very beginning, from the first night on the living room floor, that she would end it when Leon came home. She had made this promise to herself, and she had made it to the version of herself that believed in promises, in marriages, in the sanctity of the bond she had chosen 20 years ago when she was 24 years old and standing in a white dress in the garden of the Bethesda Presbyterian Church with her father walking her down the aisle. She had not made the promise to Shane. But Shane knew. He had always known. There was an unspoken understanding between them that existed in the spaces between their words. In a way they never discussed Christmas or New Year's or any holiday that required a reckoning with the future. Their relationship existed in the present tense, fully and completely, and the present tense was a country with no borders and no permanent residence, and they had both agreed to live there without complaint. But now the future was coming, like a train in a tunnel, and Jennifer could hear its sound, faint at first, growing louder. She had started thinking about the end the way you think about a building you know is going to be demolished, with a mixture of grief and relief, of sentiment and pragmatism. She did not want to lose Shane. She was not sure she knew how to be the person she had been before him, the woman who did not look forward to Tuesday evenings, who did not have a burner phone hidden in her nightstand drawer, who did not feel the particular pleasure of being known, fully and completely, by another human being. But she also could not stand the weight of what they were carrying. The secret was not just a secret anymore, it was an organism, a living thing with its own metabolism and hunger, consuming portions of her attention every day. She calculated. She covered. She rehearsed her alibis in the shower and revised them at traffic lights and lay awake at night running scenarios through her mind like a general preparing for a war she hoped would never come. And beneath the fear was something else, the knowledge that she had become over the past 2 years, a person she was not entirely proud of. A person who lied as easily as breathing. A person who had looked into the eyes of Linda O'Brien, a woman who had been nothing but kind to her, who had welcomed her into her home, who had trusted her husband in Jennifer's presence, and had smiled and made plans to get coffee and had felt nothing at all. Or rather, she had felt something. The thing she had felt was the understanding that this was the price, and she had paid it without flinching. She was not proud of this. She was, however, alive. And in the calculus of survival that her father had taught her, being alive was the only metric that mattered. Shane called on a Tuesday in September, The first Tuesday after the Labor Day break, when the summer people had retreated and the routines of the school year had reasserted themselves. He called on the burner phone, as always, and Jennifer answered on the first ring. "Jen," he said, "I need to see you." "I know," she said. "I've been thinking about it too." "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow." She could hear the relief in his breathing. She could hear, too, the thing he wasn't saying, the thing neither of them were saying, because naming it would make it real and they were not ready for it to be real. The end. The final line. The closing of a chapter that had changed the shape of her life and left her, in ways she could not fully measure, permanently altered. "Tomorrow," she repeated, and the word felt like a door closing in slow motion. Part 4. The exit Chapter 9. The last night they met at the house in Reston, because the house in Reston was theirs in a way that nowhere else was. The neutral territory of their private country. The place where the rules they had made together were the only laws that applied. Shane arrived at 7 p.m. with flowers, white lilies, her favorite, a detail he had remembered from a conversation they had never specifically had, or had had so long ago that she had forgotten she'd mentioned it. He was wearing the navy pea coat. His hair was longer than it had been in December, curling slightly at the collar, and he looked like a man who had not been sleeping well. She was wearing the dress, the red one, the one she'd bought for Charlottesville and worn once and then carefully hung back in the closet, waiting. The lipstick in the color her esthetician called winning red. Her hair was down. She had stopped straightening it 3 days ago and let it dry in its natural waves, the way Shane had once told her he liked it, in a phone call she'd saved in her memory like a photograph. He looked at her for a long time without speaking. The hallway light was on behind her, casting her in a warm glow, and the expression on his face was something she had never seen there before, a kind of naked, unguarded grief. "You look incredible," he said. "You always say that." "I always mean it." She stepped aside to let him in. The house smelled like the lavender candle she'd been burning on the coffee table, another small ritual of the past 2 years, the candle she'd light when she knew he was coming, the scent that now meant only one thing. He took her hand and held it, and his grip was warm and firm and full of all the things he wasn't saying. They didn't go to the living room. They went to the kitchen, where Jennifer had prepared a simple dinner, nothing elaborate, just pasta and a salad and a bottle of wine from the bottle Shane had brought. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table where Jennifer took her morning coffee and filled out her lawyer's forms and drafted the letters to the federal parole board that she sent every quarter. It was the most ordinary meal they had ever shared, and the most agonizing. "I talked to Leon last week," Shane said, during the pause between the salad and the pasta. He was pushing a cherry tomato around his plate with his fork. "He sounded good. Better than the last time. He said the warden let him take a computer class." "That's good," Jennifer said. She watched the tomato. She did not look up. "He's coming home in November. I know you've been counting." "I've been counting." "Jen." He said her name the way he always did, Jen, with the short vowel and the slight downward lilt that made it sound like a question and an answer at the same time. "What are we going to do?" She looked up. His eyes were dark and serious and locked on hers with an intensity that made the kitchen feel very small. "We're not going to do anything," she said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced this speech in the shower, in the car, in the dark before she fell asleep at night. "I'm going to be waiting for him when he gets out. I'm going to help him rebuild his life. And you and I are going to stop seeing each other." The words landed like a judge's gavel. She watched them hit him. She watched the resistance rise in his face, the stubborn set of his jaw, the way his hands tightened around his fork. "No," he said. "That's not. I didn't sign up for that. I didn't agree to. You didn't have to agree. It was always the deal, Shane. I told you from the beginning. I told myself. I made a promise. Jen, this isn't, you can't just, I can." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. His skin was warm. His fingers, she noticed, the same fingers that had touched her in the dark, that had learned the geography of her body like a map they were committed to memorizing, were trembling. "I made a promise to my husband. And I made a promise to myself. And I know what you're going to say. You're going to say that I'm choosing him over us, over what's real, over, it is real," Shane said, and his voice cracked on the word. "Jen, it is real. This wasn't nothing to me." She felt something crack in her chest. The thing she had been holding together for months, the careful, constructed calm that was the architecture of her survival, developed a fissure. She pressed her palm flat against the table to keep herself from reaching across and pulling him to her, from saying, "You're right, let's run, let's go somewhere no one knows us, let's start over." But she didn't. She couldn't. She had survived this long by understanding the difference between what she wanted and what she could have. And what she could have was her family, her marriage, the life she had built with a man she had chosen 20 years ago and who was waiting in a federal prison in Danville for her to be the woman he remembered. "I know it's real," she said quietly. "I know." "So why?" "Because I made a promise." She said it again, firmly, because the repetition was the only weapon she had. "Because I am the kind of person who keeps her promises. Because if I break this one, I break all of them, including the one I made to myself. Because I need to look at my reflection in the morning, Shane, and still recognize the woman looking back." He was quiet for a long time. The kitchen clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a dog barked and then stopped. The world continued on its axis, indifferent to the small apocalypse occurring around the kitchen table in Reston, Virginia. "I don't want to lose you," Shane said finally. His voice was barely audible. "I know that's selfish. I know I built something with you that I never expected to build. And I know that I can't ask you to choose me over your family. But I need you to know that." Jennifer stood up. She walked around the table and stood behind Shane's chair, and she put her hands on his shoulders and felt the tension in his muscles, the coiled readiness of a man who wanted to fight but had no enemy to fight, no argument to win. She leaned down and pressed her lips to the top of his head, right where the hair met the forehead, the most tender spot she had ever discovered on a human body. "You were never a mistake," she said. "You have to believe that. Whatever this was, whatever we were, it was the truest thing I've felt in years. And I will carry it with me. But I have to go now. Not because I want to. Because I have to." He reached up and covered her hands with his own. They stayed like that for a long time, her hands on his shoulders, his hands covering hers, the kitchen filling with the blue dark of an autumn evening and the sound of two people letting go of each other by degrees, like lowering a lifeboat into the sea. She stayed that night. They slept in each other's arms, without making love, which felt more intimate than anything they had ever done. They talked until 3 a.m. about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their regrets, the lives they might have lived if they'd been braver or more selfish or born into different families. Shane told her about his father, who had died of a heart attack in the backyard of the Richmond house when Shane was 17, and how he'd spent the rest of his life trying to build something that wouldn't be taken away. Jennifer told him about her mother, about the Alzheimer's, about the long, slow disappearance that had taught her that love was not enough to keep a person in this world. At 3 a.m., Shane fell asleep with his face in her hair, and Jennifer lay awake and watched the ceiling and thought, I am losing you. I am letting you go. And this is the right thing. And it is killing me. She left at 6 a.m. before he woke. She wrote a note on the back of a grocery list. Thank you for everything. Take care of yourself. Be happy. She did not sign it with a heart. She did not write I love you. She wrote what was true, and the truth was only this: gratitude and departure. She drove home on the dullest toll road as the sun came up, and the sky turned the color of a peach, and she cried for the first time in months, not the controlled, private tears she had rationed during the worst moments of the past 2 years, but great, heating sobs that bent her over the steering wheel and blurred her vision so badly she had to pull over at a rest stop near Herndon and sit in her car and weep. She wept for Shane, for the lives they'd had, for the future they'd never have, for the woman she'd been before October and the woman she'd become after, for Leon, who would come home to a wife who was not the same person he'd left behind, for herself, who was carrying a secret so heavy it had altered the shape of her spine. And then, when the sobs had spent themselves, she washed her face with cold water from a bottle she kept in the car, and she looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror, smudged mascara, red eyes, the face of a woman who had survived something, and she said, okay. Not to her reflection. Not to God. Just a single, declarative syllable. Okay. And she drove the rest of the way home. Hashtag Part 5. The Return. Hashtag Chapter 10. What Remains. Leon came home on a Tuesday in November, and the sky was the color of pewter, and Jennifer was waiting for him at the gate of the re-entry facility in Danville with a coat and a thermos of coffee and a smile that she had practiced in the mirror for a week. He was not the same man who had been taken away in the black sedan 3 years ago. He was thinner, prison thin, the kind of leanness that came from bad food and too much time inside your own head. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and there were new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He walked slowly, carefully, the way a man walks when he has learned that the world can change in an instant and there's nothing you can do about it. When he saw Jennifer, he stopped. He stood there, in the parking lot of the Federal Reentry Facility in Danville, Virginia, with the November wind coming from the northwest and the smell of wood smoke from somewhere distant, and he looked at his wife like he was trying to memorize her. Hi, she said. Hi. His voice was rough from disuse. Prison changed your voice, she had learned. Made it flatter, less musical. You look different? I was going to say beautiful. But yes. Different. She had lost weight. She had maintained the new hair, the new wardrobe, the new Jennifer who had emerged from the crucible of crisis. She was a 41-year-old woman who looked, her friend Carla had said recently, like someone who had been through something and come out the other side. There was a sharpness to her now, a blade-like quality that hadn't been there before. She had edges. Leon reached for her and she went to him, and they stood in the parking lot of the reentry facility in a hug that was more release than embrace, the embrace of two people who have been carrying separate weights and are finally setting them down in the same place. I'm sorry, Leon said into her hair. I'm so sorry, Jen. For everything. For putting you through this. I should have told you, I should have. It's okay, she said. And she meant it in the way that okay had always meant for her, not that things were fine, but that they would have to be fine, because the alternative was unthinkable. You're home. That's what matters. They drove back to Fairfax in silence, the radio playing softly, the Virginia countryside rolling past in its winter-brown monotony. Leon fell asleep in the passenger seat after an hour, his head tilted against the window, and Jennifer drove and watched the road and felt the weight of the 3 years pressing down on her like a physical thing. She had been faithful to him. That was the truth she would carry. In all the ways that mattered, in the way that would have held up in a court of law, in the way her father would have defined fidelity, she had been faithful to Leon. She had maintained the marriage. She had kept the promise. She had done what she said she would do. But she knew what she had done. And she knew what she had felt. And she knew that there was a room in her heart, locked, bolted, a room she never visited, that contained a memory of a man named Shane, and a winter of phone calls, and a night in Charlottesville with champagne in a clothlet tub, and the particular way someone had said her name like it was the answer to a question. Leon did not need to know about that room. Leon would never need to know. That was the deal she had made with herself, and she had kept that promise too. He started the consulting firm in February, a small operation out of a shared office in Tyson's Corner, focused on environmental compliance consulting for mid-size companies. Jennifer helped him build the client list, made calls to her father's contacts, managed the books. The business grew slowly, the way legitimate businesses do, without the shortcuts and falsified documents that had put Leon in prison in the first place. They went to couples therapy on Thursday evenings, at the recommendation of the reentry counselor. The therapist was a kind woman named Dr. Aditi Sharma, who had a talent for making silence feel productive rather than empty. They talked about trust, about communication, about the ways that a marriage could be damaged and the longer, more arduous process of repair. Leon talked about his guilt. Jennifer talked about her loneliness. Neither of them talked about the thing they couldn't talk about. And life resumed its patient, relentless forward motion. The Fairfax house sold. They bought a smaller one in Annandale, near Jennifer's father, who was aging but still sharp, still the most reliable political mind she had ever known. They adopted a golden retriever named Charlie, who slept at the foot of their bed and greeted Leon every evening when he came home from the office like he was the most important person in the world. They hosted Thanksgiving. They took a trip to the Outer Banks. They began, gradually and with great effort, to build something that looked, from the outside, like a recovered marriage. And perhaps it was. Jennifer did not know anymore where the line between performance and authenticity lay. She knew that she loved Leon, not the way she had loved him when she was 24 and standing in white in a garden, but in the way you love someone you've suffered alongside. She knew that the suffering had changed them both, and that the marriage they were building now was not the marriage they had lost, but it was a marriage, and it was theirs, and she was going to tend it with the same discipline she brought to everything. Whether it was enough, whether the quiet dinners and the couples therapy and the golden retriever and the shared mortgage constituted a life, or merely the appearance of one, was a question Jennifer had stopped asking. Some questions, she had learned, were not meant to be answered. They were meant to be carried. Chapter 11. The weight of ordinary days. The months after Leon's return were a study in the archaeology of ordinary life. Jennifer learned that recovery was not a destination but a daily negotiation, a series of small decisions made in the quiet hours of morning and the uncertain hours of night. She woke each day at 6:15, before Leon, and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and the newspaper she no longer read, using the ritual as a kind of anchor, a way of proving to herself that she was still the kind of person who kept her teens. Leon slept upstairs with the door open now, a small change that had happened without discussion or acknowledgement. The open door was a concession to his need for air and her need to hear him breathing, proof that he was still there, still real. She had not cried since the morning on the Dulles Toll Road. She had not allowed herself to seal the full weight of what she had carried during those 2 years and 8 months, the secret cargo that had altered the architecture of her soul. There was no room for that now. Leon needed her steady. The business needed her organized. The marriage needed her present in a way that left no room for looking backward. So she buried it. She put the weight in the room in her heart and locked the door and threw away the key, and she got up each morning and made coffee and read newspapers she didn't absorb and tended to her husband and her father and her home with the same meticulous care she had always brought to the small things. She did not let herself wonder about Shane. She did not let herself wonder about the woman she had been in Reston, Virginia, in the winter of her discontent. But sometimes, in the shower, in the car, in the gray space between waking and sleeping, she felt the ghost of a hand on her shoulder, the phantom warmth of a body beside hers in the dark, the echo of a voice saying her name, like it was the answer to a question he had been asking his whole life. She let these moments pass. She had learned to let them pass. Leon was different, but the difference was in the ways that prison had carved him, not in any fundamental change of character. He was quieter, more contemplative, less likely to engage in the easy banter that had once characterized their marriage. He had developed a habit of pausing before he spoke, as though running his words through an internal filter that asked, "Is this true? Is this necessary? Will this hurt anyone?" It was, Jennifer thought, the habit of a man who had learned the hard way that words had consequences, that the wrong sentence spoken in the wrong room could reshape your entire life. He was also, she discovered, more attentive than he had been before. The laziness that had crept into their marriage over the years, the assumption that she would always be there, always be fine, always be the steady one, had been burned away in the Federal Correctional Institution. He noticed her now. He noticed when she was tired, when she was worried, when the weight of the bookkeeping was pressing down on her. He brought her tea without being asked. He suggested walks in the evening, hand in hand through the Annandale neighborhood, past the houses of people whose lives were simpler and more honest than theirs. "I don't deserve you," he said one night in October, on the back patio, the last warm evening before the cold set in. They were drinking wine, his first glass since his release, a bottle she'd bought to mark the occasion of nothing in particular. "I need you to know that I know that. Everything you did while I was gone, the lawyers, the house, taking care of my parents, you did that alone. And I wasn't there. And I can't ever make that up to you." Jennifer looked at her husband. He was 44 now, gray at the temples, thinner than he'd been, but sitting in a patio chair in the autumn dark with a glass of wine in his hand and the porch light catching the lines of his face. He looked like a man who had been broken and was trying, with great effort, to reassemble himself into something whole. "You don't have to make anything up," she said. "You just have to be here." "I'm here," he said. "I'm here, Jen. I'm not going anywhere." She reached across the table and took his hand. His skin was rough, she noticed that now, the calluses that prison work had left on his palms, the evidence of a life that had been interrupted and would never fully resume its previous shape. She held his hand and looked at the stars and thought about the room in her heart, the locked room with the memory of another man's touch. "I know," she said. She did not say, "I know, and I am carrying something you cannot know about, and I will carry it for the rest of my life, and this is the price of the woman I became when you were taken away." She did not say any of that. She held his hand and looked at the stars and let the moment be what it was. Two people on a patio in October, holding on to each other because holding on was all they knew how to do. #Chapter 12. The shape of what remains the couple's therapy with Dr. Sharma continued through the winter and into spring. They met every Thursday at 7 p.m. in a brick-faced building near the Fairfax Hospital District, in an office suite decorated with tasteful prints of Asian landscapes and a small fountain that burbled in the corner. Dr. Sharma was in her 50s, a small woman with a voice like warm honey and the unnerving ability to identify the thing you were most afraid to say. Jennifer liked her and did not trust her. Liked her because she was kind, because she facilitated conversations that needed to happen, because she had a gift for making the silences in the room feel like spaces where truth could breathe. Did not trust her because Jennifer had become, over the past several years, a person who could not afford to speak freely, and therapy required a kind of honesty that she was no longer capable of giving. In March, Dr. Sharma asked Jennifer to describe, in a single word, what her marriage felt like at that moment. Jennifer thought about it. She thought about Leon's hand in hers on the back patio. She thought about the golden retriever sleeping at the foot of their bed. She thought about the restaurant supply business that was growing faster than expected, and the client in Baltimore who had referred 3 others, and the new house in Annandale with the big backyard where they were planning to put a garden. She thought about Shane, about the Reston house, about the burner phone she had destroyed in the garbage disposal 3 days after the last night, standing at the kitchen sink with water running and the small plastic device whirring and sparking until it was nothing but fragments. Tenacious, she said finally. Dr. Sharma raised an eyebrow. Tenacious. It survives, Jennifer said. Whatever happens to it, it survives. Dr. Sharma wrote something in her notebook. Jennifer never found out what. Leon asked the same question, said uncertain. And then, after a long pause, but worth fighting for. They were not wrong, either of them. That was the thing about marriage, Jennifer was learning. It was not a single truth, but a collection of overlapping truths, some of which were compatible and some of which were not. You did not resolve the incompatibilities. You simply lived with them, the way you lived with the slight ache in your knee that warned of coming weather or the recurring dream that visit you at intervals too regular to be coincidental. In May, Jennifer's father had a stroke. It was minor, a small clot that cleared itself with intervention and left him with a slight limp on his right side and a new hesitation in his speech that had not been there before. But it was a warning, and Richard Chang was not a man who ignored warnings. He retired from the deputy mayor's office that summer, the culmination of a career in public service that had spanned 4 decades, and he moved into a condo near Jennifer and Leon, in a building with an elevator and a security guard and a view of the Washington Monument in the distance. Jennifer visited him every Sunday. She brought crossword puzzle books and the kind of black coffee he liked, and sometimes, when he was tired and the silence felt comfortable rather than awkward, she sat with him in his small living room and watched the news with the volume low and did not say anything at all. Her father had never been a man of many words, and the stroke had made him even less so. But the silence between them was the silence of people who shared a genetic code and a set of values and an understanding of how the world worked that did not require articulation. "You're different," he said to her one Sunday in July, as she was leaving. He was sitting in his armchair by the window, the sunlight making his white hair glow. "Since Leon came back, you're stronger." Jennifer stood in the doorway of her father's condo, with the elevator humming behind her and the hallway carpet soft beneath her feet, and she looked at the man who had taught her everything she knew about survival. "I had to be," she said. Her father nodded. He did not ask follow-up questions. He did not probe. That was the thing about Richard Chang. He knew that the past was a country you visited only when you had to, and that the most important thing was to keep moving forward, to keep your eyes on the road ahead, to never look back unless you were prepared for what you might see. Jennifer kissed him on the forehead and left. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button and waited, and when the doors opened she stepped inside and pressed the buttons of the lobby and watched the floors count down, and she thought about the locked room in her heart and the man who had taught her to survive and the husband who was waiting for her at home with a golden retriever and a marriage that was not what it had been but was still, somehow, worth the effort. She was 43 years old. She had survived her husband's arrest and imprisonment, a love affair that had nearly broken her, a version of herself she had not expected to become, and a return to a life that required her to pretend that none of it had ever happened. She had survived by becoming harder, sharper, more strategic. She had survived by locking doors and throwing away keys and learning to live in the spaces between what she felt and what she could show. And she was not done surviving. That was the thing about being a Chang, the survival never ended. It just changed shape, adapting to new circumstances, new crises, new demands. There would be other storms, other tests, other nights when she lay awake and wondered if the woman in the mirror was someone she still recognized. But she would meet them. She would meet them the way she had met everything since that October night, with her spine straight and her face composed and the absolute, unshakable knowledge that she would not break. The Changs did not break. She had known that since she was a little girl, sitting at her father's knee while he explained the nature of power and compromise and the long game. She knew it now, in her bones, in the hard shell that had formed around her heart over the past several years. She did not break. She only bent, and bent again, and bent a third time when bending was all that was left. And then, when the pressure finally eased, she straightened as much as she could, and she kept going. That was life in the end. Not a straight line, but a series of curves, each one reshaping you, each one taking you somewhere you had not intended to go. The only question that mattered was not where you ended up, but whether you could still recognize yourself when you looked in the mirror. Jennifer could. She was not sure if that was enough, but it was what she had. And she held onto it the way she held onto everything, tightly, carefully, with both hands. #epilogue. The unasked question 2 years after Leon's return, Jennifer ran into Shane at the Whole Foods in Fairfax. It was a Saturday morning in September, the light slanting gold through the windows, the produce section fragrant with the smell of late summer peaches. Jennifer was reaching for a carton of blueberries when she felt someone standing near her, and she looked up and there he was. Shane. He looked the same. The navy pea coat, the slightly too long hair, the weathered hands of a man who worked with them. But there was something different in his face, a softness, maybe, or a settling. The restless hunger she remembered was gone. In its place was something quieter, more resigned. "Jen," he said. "Shane." Her voice was steady. Her heart was not. They stood in the produce section of the Whole Foods in Fairfax, Virginia, on a September morning, and looked at each other, and for a moment the rest of the store, the shoppers with their carts, the music playing, the fluorescent lights humming, fell away, and there was only the two of them, standing in the wreckage of a thing that had been real. "How are you?" she asked. "Good. Linda and I were doing better. We went to counseling. Turns out what we needed was to talk." Who knew? The smile he gave her was wry, self-deprecating, tinged with the old Shane charm. "The restaurant is doing great. We opened a second location in Bethesda." "That's wonderful. I'm glad." A pause. A peach rolling slightly in its display, nudged by the cold air from the vent. "How's Leon?" "Good. He's good. The business is growing. He's himself again. Mostly. That's good, Jen. That's really good. Another pause. The manager of the produce section was watching them from the end of the aisle, mildly curious about the two people blocking the blueberries. I should go, Jennifer said. Yeah, Shane said. Me too. They did not touch. They did not embrace. There was no moment of dramatic farewell, no exchange of meaningful looks, no cinematic tableau. There was only this, two people in a grocery store, in the produce section, surrounded by peaches and blueberries and the ordinary detritus of a life that goes on, as life does, regardless of what you have lost. Jen, Shane said, as she turned to go. She stopped. She looked back. Thank you, he said, for being who you are. She smiled, a real smile, small and private, the kind she reserved for moments of unexpected grace. You too, Shane. Take care. She walked away. She placed her blueberries in her cart and continued down the aisle and did not look back again, because looking back was a luxury she had taught herself not to afford. Some questions, she had learned, were not meant to be answered. And some loves, the forbidden ones, the strategic ones, the ones that exist in the shadows of other lives, were not meant to be understood. They were meant to be survived. And survived well. And carried, quietly, for the rest of your days, like a stone in your pocket that you have learned to love for its weight. Jennifer Chang Marshall pushed her cart through the Whole Foods in Fairfax, Virginia, on a September morning, and she was 43 years old, and she was married, and she was alive, and she was despite everything, despite the stone and the locked room and the memory of a winter she would never fully put behind her, okay. She bought the blueberries. She bought a bottle of wine. She drove home to Annandale, where Leon was waiting with the dog and a dinner she hadn't asked for but was grateful to receive. And somewhere, in a room she never visited, a woman she had once been with still standing in a kitchen in Reston with a glass of wine and a broken promise and the quiet, devastating knowledge that she had loved someone she was not supposed to love, and that she had let him go anyway. And that letting go was, perhaps, the truest form of love she had ever had. #afterward, the story she never told. There is a version of this story that Jennifer never told anyone, and never would. It was the version in which she had chosen differently. The version where, on that last night in Reston, she had looked at Shane across the kitchen table and said, yes. Let's go. Let's leave all of this behind, the marriages, the obligations, the careful architecture of obligation that had kept us both trapped in lives that were smaller than we deserved. Let's be selfish, just once, and see what happens. She had thought about it. That was the thing she could never admit to anyone, not even to herself in the light of day. She had thought about it, and she had wanted it, and she had felt the pull of that other life like a tide beneath her feet, tugging at her ankles, trying to drag her out to sea. She had wanted to run. She had wanted to be the kind of woman who grabbed what she wanted and damned the consequences, who burned her bridges and salted the earth and started fresh in some city where no one knew her name. She had wanted to be someone else entirely. But she was a Chang. And Changs did not run. Changs stayed and fought and bent and adapted and survived, and they did not leave their posts no matter how much the ground beneath them was crumbling. Her father had taught her that, in 1,000 different ways, over 1,000 different years. The measure of a person was not what they did when things were easy. It was what they did when everything was falling apart. So she had stayed. She had kept her promise. She had chosen the hard thing, the disciplined thing, the thing that required her to be less of what she wanted and more of what she had always been, a woman who could be relied upon, a woman who held the line, A woman who understood that love was not the only thing that mattered in life, that character was built in the choices you make when no one was watching and every instinct was screaming at you to take the easier path. Was she happy? That was the question people might ask if they knew. If they could see the whole story, the full shape of the years she had lived. Was she happy with the choice she had made? The answer was, happiness was not the point. Happiness was a weather system, temporary and changeable, passing through your life on its way to somewhere else. What she had instead of happiness was something more durable, purpose, structure, a sense of meaning that came from the daily practice of showing up for her life, even when she did not feel like it. She had a husband who loved her, a father who respected her, a home that was warm and full of the small sounds of a life being lived. She had work that mattered, friends who cared, a community that had held her together during the worst years and would hold her together now, if she let them. She had, in other words, a life. A real one. Not the exciting, dangerous, all-consuming life she had briefly lived in the winters of her affair, but something quieter and more sustaining. Something that would last. She did not regret Shane. She would carry him with her until she died, the memory of his hands, his voice, the way he had looked at her like she was the most interesting thing he had ever seen. That memory was a gift, even if it was also a wound. It had shown her something about herself she had not known, that she was capable of that kind of feeling, that depth, that surrender. She was not just a careful, disciplined Chang. She was also a woman who could love with her whole heart, who could fall and fall and fall and still find the strength to stand up and walk away. That was what she was proudest of, in the end. Not the survival, though she was proud of that too, but the dignity. The way she had ended things. The way she had not made a mess of it, had not begged or bargained or tried to hold on to something that was never meant to be hers. She had walked away clean. She had kept her word. She had been, in the truest sense, a person of honor. And if honor was lonely sometimes, if there were nights when she lay awake and wondered what would have happened if she'd been braver or less principled, if she'd been the kind of woman who took what she wanted without asking permission from anyone, well, that was the price. And she had known it going in. She had known it from the beginning, when she first kissed Shane on the living room floor of the Reston house and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She had known. And she had chosen. And she would choose again if she had to do it over. That was the story she never told. Not because it was shameful, but because it was hers. Because some things were too fragile to survive being spoken aloud, too precious to risk breaking under the weight of other people's judgment. She kept it in the locked room in her heart, next to the memory of her mother's face in the final years of the Alzheimer's, next to the sound of the handcuffs clicking on the porch in Fairfax, next to all the other things she carried without complaint because carrying was what the Changs did. And on the shelf in that room, next to all the other burdens, she kept one more thing, the knowledge that she had been loved. Really loved. By someone who had seen her at her most vulnerable and most honest and had chosen to love her anyway. That love had not lasted, it could not last, not in the world they lived in, but it had been real. It had been the most real thing she had felt in years. And that was enough. That would always be enough. Jennifer Chang Marshall closed the door to the room in her heart, and she went downstairs to have dinner with her husband, and she was grateful for the life she had chosen, because it was hers, and she had earned it, and she would not trade it for anything in the world. Not for anything.